I'm making my way up to a vantage point where we can talk about what we really mean by sea country and the wonders of it. But as well, on our foreshores, on the top of the bay, we've got absolutely splendid things to see. Limestone cliffs 5 million years old, rocky fossilised upwards underneath it 5 million plus, walkways to through the trees here and the plants. And these are all the way along the beach. And I think we showed you earlier perhaps a film of the Table Rock, that splendid rock jutting out into the sea, and you look across the bay. But further up here, when we get to the top of the hill, we'll be able to talk more definitively about sea country when you can see it all. And the final steps up now to a lookout where you can see the full splendour of the bay. Sea country. What is it? Well, that's it out there. You can see the Mornington Peninsula down there. You can see Melbourne on the other side. 2,000 square kilometres of the cleanest body of water in the entire world next to a major city. It's had its ups and downs over its 140 million years, and I'll mention those later. But that's what we're talking about. That's what we call sea country, and we're very, very fortunate people to have that on our doorstep. Well, we know what sea country is, but it's a very interesting story as to how the name came about. To take you back 140 million years ago, this area of the land dropped, the Strait ranges got pushed up, the Mornington Peninsula got pushed up, the second bay got land dropped, and the hills to the east got pushed up. And as a result of that, we had these two bays, the two bay system. Now, it's been very, very volatile ever since. And only 16,000 years ago, there was an ice age. And that ice age caused much of the water in this area and around the world to get taken up in the Antarctic and the Arctic Circle. The water then dropped in the bay and it dried out, and people moved in. And at that time, there was a waterfall 120 metres falling from the bay down to the waters outside Port Phillip Bay. And it must have been wonderful for an Aboriginal child to stand there looking down at that absolutely unbelievable waterfall. And you could see the land bridge to Tasmania then, and that's when many of the Aborigines actually transported themselves to Tasmania. But then, between the period of about 16,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago, the world's seas began to rise again, about 1/3 of a metre every 100 years. And at the end of that period, the bay had re-flooded. And all that land that people had there for thousands of years, hunted out there, the kangaroos are out there, the wallabies, the wombats, the whole shebang, all that was lost to the local Aborigines. They got used to it and accepted it, and they called it their country, and their lost country was called their sea country, and that's where the term comes from. And it was not only 16,000 years ago and 8,000 years ago these issues occurred. We've now found out that only about 900 years ago, the bay itself silted up at the heads with a lot of clay coming down the Yarra for some reason or another, and the Bunurong and the Werribee rivers, and it chocked off the refill, the daily twice tidal refill from outside in the Bass Strait. And the net result of that was that the evaporation exceeded the inflow, and the bay dried out again, leaving us with a special little lake right at the entrance called Lake Nem. And the whole bay itself, in fact, the Aborigines call Nairm, N-A-I-R-M. However, nothing simple in life, as we all know, and catastrophically in one moment, that artificial clay wall breached and the seas came tumbling back in with an almighty rush into this area. And they were so strong that apart from killing every single living creature out there over that 2,000 square kilometre area, all around the bay, the wind was so strong that it knocked down the trees and left them splattered all over the place. And the Aborigines remember that very well in their verbal history, and one of them related it to our very early and wonderful settler Georgiana McRae, whom McRae's named after, and told her the story of that cataclysmic day when the waters came back. And he finished up his story with saying, "No more walk Corio, no more walk Corio," sadly. And it was sadder than it seemed, because not only was there a lot of loss of land, a lot of death, but the young Aboriginal boys used to walk across, and all the girls and the boys walk across to other tribes on the other side of the bay to find mates. And when that land bridge was lost at the heads, which is an easy walk for the Bunurong people around here because they extended from Portsea right around, when that was lost, it was a terribly long walk around this side of the bay, hundreds of kilometres. So it was a tragedy, a great tragedy. If we look out, we can see the Tea House Reef, and surrounding it in that roughish water you can see very, very mirror-like beautiful pale blue water that reflects the sky. Just another joy of our sea country. And it's interesting, that's caused by the sea grasses being a little higher there, and when the rough water flows over the sea grasses they take the energy out of the water and it flattens out. So it's very common when the tides are just right to see beautiful things like that. Well, the question of interest for us all these days is, what was it like here during the Aboriginal sole habitation time? Well, they came here, it would seem, round about 50,000 years ago. It's an extraordinary figure, and recently we found a skeleton encased in clay and other materials that we can work on radioactive decay from, that showed that one man at least was here 70,000 years ago. But we know that 50,000 years ago the Aborigines came from India. And I've got this slide to show you. They walked over what we call Sunderland, all the way from India down to Australia. And it's because the oceans of the world diminished with an ice age. The oceans were pulled up, as I mentioned before, into the North and South Pole. The seas went lower and lower and lower until man could actually walk, canoe and occasionally swim, I suppose, all the way from India to Australia. We've also got some assumptions about the Aborigines that are all wrong. They communicated nationally right across the entire country. And this slide I'm showing you now, or we're showing you now, is one that includes the trading routes for one thing alone, the baler shell from the northwest to Western Australia. It was traded across the entire nation because it was a fabulous thing to carry water in. And that's just baler shells alone. We also traded materials from down here right up to Cape York through special tracks and paths that were made. So it was a vast national civilization and the oldest civilization on Earth. And now, during the time of the Aborigines' habitation of Australia, they cohabited for 25,000 years at least with megafauna. That means big animals. Mega means big and fauna means animal, flora means plants. Megafauna. And they were giant kangaroos. The thiasaline was up here. There were wombats as big as hippopotami. There was even a lion, a marsupial lion, because those sort of marsupials only existed in Australia. And that marsupial lion looked a bit like a tiger, but they classify him as a lion. And as well, there were some pretty impressive lizards. One of them is a goanna that I'm showing you now. And that goanna was 7 metres long. When we talk to children about these things down here at the beach, we often get 7 of them to hold hands and stretch out and say that's how long the goannas were. And there's a big drop in the faces and look from one end to the other. But they were big. And yet, we haven't found, among the skeletons of all those animals, a single one indicating human-induced trauma, like a skull crushed with an axe or a spear through the ribs, scraping the ribs. So that's really interesting. You know, they died out about 16,000 years ago during the ice age that I mentioned later, I think, on when the bay dried out. So they were pretty exciting times, as you can see. This slide that I'll be showing now gives you a good representation of the organisation of Aborigines locally. The big lot, from roughly from Geelong over to Western Port Bay, were known as the Kulin Nation. And within the Kulin Nation, as you can see, they had 5 major tribes. The one we work with mostly is the Bunurong tribe, who traditionally own the land we're occupying at the moment. Within that Bunurong tribe, there were 6 clans, and the clan that was in this area was the Nagarkwilum, which means the stone people. So it's all pretty cool. They were well organised, and had, in fact, I think in Australia some 200 different languages, which wouldn't have made life too easy. But if you're going to trade right across the nation, across so many tribes and clans, there are no doubt bilingual people on the borders of each of those territories. They also, which is not necessarily pertinent to today, they farmed their potato, called the yam daisy, all the way from virtually the New South Wales border to the South Australian border in the centre part of Victoria. Now this final slide is fairly interesting. It shows Jimmy Dunbar and his wife in supposedly a humpy in Mordialloc. And why am I showing you this? Well, for 2 reasons. One, Jimmy and Nancy were the last full-blooded Bunurong people in the area. It took 37 years since white arrival to their complete, till the last one of them died, Jimmy Dunbar, in 1877. And there's another misleading thing you might want to know about too, I certainly did. They've got him in a Mayama or a humpy, and he might have lived there. But Aborigines built townships, villages out of stone. And at Warrnambool they built stone villages and huge smokehouses for eels, and great eel races, which are still there, hundreds of metres long, to catch eels, to fatten them up, to smoke them, and then trade them across the nation. No one was interested in us or concerned about us when we first settled in Australia, that first 18th century or 19th century settlement, 18th, 19th, and we're unable to develop to a certain extent in our own way. But by the time the next century had come along, the European culture had totally dominated us. We aspired to European values, we dressed like the Europeans, totally inappropriate for Australia. And then in the 20th century came the great wave of American culture. Hollywood, all their movies, the jazz singers, the cowboys and Indians, American presidents, Congress, the Bill of Rights, all that stuff, blue jeans, flowed over us. And we lost ourselves to some extent because in truth, Nellie Melba and Banjo Patterson and Ned Kelly don't cut it against a great wave of that sort of thing. Now we have a really big problem. This century will be the century of China. And China, with its 5,000 years of culture and recorded history, will overwhelm us as well. So the question is, what can we do about it? Well, the one thing we do have that no one can take away from us is 60,000 years of human history and heritage on this great island continent of ours. It's our great treasure, and we have to embrace that and use that to protect ourselves and our sense of identity against foreign influences such as this century China. Just a couple of final comments there. One, I would say without doubt that more people could name the American president than could name the Prime Minister of Australia. And that's a telling thing for us. And secondly, I'd advise everyone and admonish us to find out about Aboriginal heritage, learn it, digest it, and feel that you're part of that continuum of human history on this great continent of ours.